Hey guys, Drew, listen, we're back. We've just finished the after trade show. Privileged to be an ambassador for Atomic and Frogley's Offshore. I just wanted to quickly touch base about some of the plastics that are out and about these days. So there's quite a few new ones on the market, which is really cool, from some other companies, and wish them all the very, very best. But I want everyone to remember that the old school or the existing plastics that are out there still catch fish just as much as the new ones on the market. So by all means, I can't wait to have a throw at some of these new particular products and have a crack and see how they compare. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about the Atomic Plazos and the prong in particular. It's been around a long time. Great prawn profile and prawn pattern. You've got the little tail that oscillates as you retrieve it and creates a lot of action, and also these feelers, which I don't think anyone's got feelers like the prong. The little legs on the side here, very subtle action on those, but those feelers will definitely pull back and look exactly like a prawn when you're retrieving it through the water. Colors, many different colors on the market. Myself, I really like the natural colors. Carolina pumpkin is a fantastic color and a very natural color, like a jelly prawn. Can't beat it, really. Its natural colors are the way to go. If you're trying to match the hatch type of thing. Matching the profile or the size of the bait is also very important when you're trying to catch fish. So sort of keeping your eyes open and seeing what's jumping around. This is the 3-inch prong. The 2-inch prong is a smaller profile, which is very similar to the jelly prawns that are out there. How I rig them? Well, let's talk about rigging jig heads onto any plastic. You've got the hook, obviously. These are Gamakatsu hooks. You've got a bait keeper. So the bait keeper is just there. On this particular seeker, which is the Atomic Seeker, you've got the hidden weight version. So it's a jig head hook with the 1, 2, 3, 4 barbs, which holds your plastic on your hook. Not a lot of companies have very good bait keepers. I can't fault the Seekers at all, the Atomic Seekers. They just lock onto your plastics and it's very difficult to get them off, particularly in the hidden weight version. So if you don't believe me, get out there and have a go. See if you can find a better bait keeper or a plastic keeper. So this is another typical plastic profile, which is the minnow. These are the 3 3/4 inch minnows from Atomic. They've also got a smaller profile, which is a really good profile of minnow, and that is the Carolina pumpkin color as well. It's got nice little tail action, as you can see, and it will attract fish with any subtle movements of your rod tip. Profiles, size of bait, and the size of your lure does make a difference when you're trying to catch bream in a competition. Look at what's going on in the water. If the bait are small white bait, use a smaller profile because that's what the fish will be feeding on. There's nothing wrong with changing the colors, but I've found that my success rate dramatically increases if I'm just matching the hatch. So if I find that I'm not getting too many bites, I might throw a bigger profile to try and interest the fish, or even a different type of plastic that's obviously something that the fish will love to eat, which would be a prawn or maybe a crab or a mussel profile. Or a mussel bait, I should say, or a crab bait. But most of the time you want to match the hatch. So if they're a bigger bait fish swimming around and you can find those schools of bait, the bream will more than likely be underneath them, as other pelagic fish or other aggressive fish like tailor will attack them, and then parts of those bait fish will start falling down and wafting down, and the bream will be underneath those schools of bait. So there's a lot of bait around at the moment, and you want to target those fish that are deep. Match the hatch. Jig heads. Let's talk a little bit about the jig heads and how you rig them. So this is an older style ball type jig head. You've got the newer profile, which is the hidden weights if you're fishing shallow water and around structure, and you want to just sort of keep it nice and close to the structure and just let it waft down slowly. Love that technique, particularly in summer. Middle-sized jig heads from 1/11th ounce to 1/16th, and then going up in weight to 1/8 and 1/6 and then 1/4. So the other week I was fishing and pre-fishing for bream, and I was using the Seekers 1/4s. Caught quite a few fish just because I was fishing a lot of fast running water around structure, and I wanted to get it down and I wanted to get it in the fish's face, and I wanted to stay there for longer, particularly when the current's acting on your line and pulling that bait away from where they're sitting. So if you're finding yourself in really deep water and fast current, go up to the heavier size, use a Seeker or something similar, and you can't go wrong. You won't get down if that current's ripping too fast, or you might just have to make sure that you cast in the right direction so that the weight of the jig head will waft down in the current. It may never touch the bottom, but give it plenty of slack line to get down and give it plenty of time. So working out your count rate or your sink rate of your jig head is important, particularly if you're using the lighter weight jig heads. That's a 1/8. That is a 1/12. These are all Gamakatsu hooks. That profile is the Seekers. And I'll just go back to the Seeker. That bait keeper there is solid as well. Really keeps that plastic locked onto your jig head. The Gamakatsu ball sinker or ball jig head. Old school sort of design, I suppose, if you like, but still catches fish. Still gets the keeps the bait on nicely on those bait keepers as well. And then in particular circumstances, the ball jig head will still work just as good as any of the other new ones that are out there on the market. So don't ignore the old school sort of style jig heads. They work just fine. Key point is to get your bait, your plastic and the jig head down nice and deep to where the fish are holding. And if the fish are holding deep, you want to also make sure that you're presenting that bait really well. So when I rig the jig heads on the plastics, I try and make sure I'm dead center, and I thread it through, and I make sure that that hook comes out the very center of its back. If it's not coming out the center of the back, I'll re-line it up again and make sure that that plastic, whether it be a minnow pattern, prawn pattern, or any other pattern, you want to make sure that your jig head and your hook is rigged centrally. That will create a really nice, that's one slightly off. I'm just going to adjust that. You want to make sure that that bait and your lure is presented perfectly to the fish, because they are smart and they will know if something's not quite right. It won't stop them from eating it, but I find that your hookup rate is much greater if you're presenting a very, very good natural bait. Hence the natural colors and the natural profiles, and to get that bait nice and straight. I'll try again with the minnow. So with the minnow, again, you want to try and just thread it through, just bend it over the top of the hook, and then make sure the point of that hook comes right out of the middle in the top of the back. If it doesn't, do it again. If you have trouble with it, throw it away and start again with a new plastic. So there's a nice one that's nice and straight. I also try and get the plastics that are nice and straight out of the packet as well. So sometimes I'll have a bit of a kink in the tail just because they've been sitting for some time. This one's got a very slight kink in the tail. It won't stop me from using it, but again, I'll try and use the plastics that are nice and flat and straight, and try and use those plastics first before I start using the bent ones that may have a slight kink in them. So do your homework, practice how you rig up your plastics, practice rigging your plastics onto the jig heads. That one's nice and straight. This one's a radioactive rooster, and let's just do this one again. So jig head goes into the top of the plastic, trying to get it dead center in the top of the head. and then I just let it go, and then try and make sure it naturally rolls onto that hook and jig head. Again, making sure that that hook comes out the very top of the back in the center. Sometimes the plastic won't go over the keeper, so you want to get a little bit of saliva and wet that down, and just to push it on. That one's been rigged on a little bit too far. Again, practice makes perfect, and just keep adjusting it until you're happy that it's sitting dead straight. See, there's a slight bend in it, not happy with it. I'll start again. I might do this 3 or 4 times before I get it right. That's a better profile. You can see that that one's a lot straighter through the middle of the back there. That bait is going to present really natural in the water, and it's going to look like a bait fish. And what the Bream are eating at the moment. So let's talk about comps. ABT Bream comps coming up. I'm going to be fishing the deep, if you don't already know. The jig head profile, jig heads, I'm going to be fishing minnows, and I'm going to be fishing prawns, and I'm going to try and match the hatch, particularly in the size of the bait. So if I match the size of the bait that's floating around, you give yourself more chance to hook up a fish that's going to be feeding on that bait. I'll definitely be using my forward-facing sonar, and also down scan, side scan, to try and get hold of the structure and see what's happening with the schools of bait and the structure that the Bream may be holding in. Sometimes it's really hard to find Bream on structure, but the technology is getting better and better, and I can't wait to start pre-fishing this Friday and using some of the older school techniques that I've had and had practiced for many, many years, 15, 20 years ago, when I first started doing competitive fishing. Now we're fishing with a lot more technology, with the sonar and the fish finders, if you like. We are really targeting those schools of fish and the bait, and now we're actually presenting these perfect profiles and great plastics that are out and about that are much more natural looking, or they'll create a nice little vibration that the fish will be enticed to chow down on. So competitions this Friday. It starts with the pre-fish this Friday on my hometown in the Gold Coast Broadwater. There's tons of fish up at Jumping Pin, and I'll probably head up there and pre-fish a little bit, and then search around for some fish, mainly targeting fish in the deep and really seeing what they want to take, working out the currents, the tides, structure, and using all the technology I can to try and get those bigger fish. Everyone's got their own plan and their own theories and techniques. I like to try and stay fairly simple and basic. If this time of the year the fish are spawning and they're nice and deep, we want to get those jig heads down nice and deep. And what I use is the 1/4 ounce, 1/8 ounce, 1/6 or quarter, 1/6, 1/8. And then if the slack tide's on, I'll go to 1/16, 1/11 sort of jig heads, that sort of style. And I generally fish with the size 1 jig head. This is the heavy gauge wire, so trying to pin those fish and making sure that those fish the bigger fish don't crush those hooks. The heavy gauge wire is really good too. If you're fishing pontoons and shallow water, can't go past the hidden weights. Really good jig head. Same thing, make sure you present your plastic really well. Get it in the fish's face, make it stay there for longer, and then you'll have a higher hookup rate. Anyway, guys, that's about it for me today. Take care. Enjoy your weekend that's going to come up. I know it's only the start of the week, but enjoy your weekend. Hopefully you get out there and fish, and I'll probably do a follow-up on how I went at the ABT Bream comp coming up on the Gold Coast this weekend. Okay, take care. Cheers. See ya.